Okay, we got a special thing on the dairy rate today. Over the last few months, you've had to sit here and listen to me pontificate about my thoughts on the offense and particularly the offensive line play. And I thought maybe it's time to bring in someone with a better perspective, more access, and has been in the offensive line room. And that's why I have Colten Bartholomew here from Wisconsin State Journal, Badger Extra, Madison.com. First, I think one of the things why I wanted to get you on is first to say thank you. You're when I first started this whole dairy raid thing way back in the day in January, you were one of the first people who subscribed to me. You gave me some nice comments and letting me know, okay, I'm on the right track. So first thing, that's what I want to say is thank you for that.
Hey man, you do good work.
I appreciate it. I mean, I'm just a coach and not an English major, but I hope we're bridging the gap a little bit from the average fan to the actual on the field job. So what I wanted to bring you on today to talk about is the offensive line. It is a much discussed point of view topic with Wisconsin football in terms of this transition to the Phil Longo offense. And what I need perspective on is you see so much. It seems like if I'm praising Jack Nelson, somebody else is saying, "Oh, he's terrible." Yep. Or if I'm railing on Raleigh Mullman, someone else tells me that he had the best game of the season. And so what I kind of want to see with this, and I think it's kind of leave it into like the big overall picture with this offensive line, is where's the disconnect? Like, what are we not seeing that, on the outside, it looks like Jack Nelson can't move, but he's an NFL draft prospect or whatever. What are we not seeing? Or maybe what are we seeing that is not as big of a deal in the offensive line room?
Sure. So I think I'd start with this line has been wildly inconsistent. So I think there is some merit to the fact that some weeks they look a lot better and other weeks they take some big steps back. You mentioned the tackles, and I think this school's reputation with offensive line is kind of a blessing and a curse for the guys that play these positions, because everybody wants these tackles to be Joe Thomas 2, 3, 4.0, whatever it is. And that's just not happening. And that's not going to happen for a long time. And, I think you can really trace it back to the last time that this line was like truly, truly dominant. I think it was probably the 2017 season. They go undefeated in the regular season, lose in the Big Ten title game, go on to a bowl. Like, that was the last time I think this line was like such a far and away advantage for this team. And then obviously you have the emergence of Jonathan Taylor that year. That there's a symbiosis there of great running backs help average offensive line, great lines help average running back. When you have both good, you see what happens. So I think there's been just this kind of a slow decline. And the thing is, like, this line for the last few years has been kind of a B. In my opinion, like if you're grading out, it always teams have average out to about a B. And most teams around college football would kill to have a B. They struggle so hard with it. But then you look at Wisconsin, and not having an A to an A plus has just seemed like horrendous. But getting back to this current season, I think the biggest thing to me is you're seeing the struggles that this team's had of like, all right, when they find a little bit of rhythm, let's say with the run game or with certain concepts within the run game, either they have an injury like to Braylon Allen or Ches Maluzzi that alters it, or Phil Longo starts getting away from it a little bit because he's trying to get to that counter, right? Okay, this is working. Defense has to start reacting to it. Then the counter comes, and then that's not working. So I think what we're seeing is you see those flashes of good plays. You see maybe like a half of good plays from a particular lineman or the line as a whole, and then there's a step back. And that's one of the things that didn't used to happen, where this line didn't matter what was going on. They were going to win the line of scrimmage. You could basically bank on 3 to 4 yards straight up the gut whenever you need it. That's just not how it's been for the last few years. And fans, I think, have a tougher time accepting that, even though that's been kind of a trend the last few years. I think it's a big picture thing for the offseason. How do you get back to that? Do you need to get back to that in this system? Maybe. But I think it's the thing that's been happening that I think is a bigger red flag this year because of all of the issues on the offense. And I know, as a coach, like, when the offense isn't working, when there's anything that doesn't work, everybody's first thing is, oh, offensive line's bad or offensive line didn't do their job. Because there's the most of any position, there's the more offensive linemen out on the field at one time than anybody else. So I think that's the easiest cop out is to say, oh, that didn't work because they didn't block it right. So I think there's a little bit of that happening as well.
So when we're looking at that kind of, it's working now and then it stops working, that kind of going back and forth, is that a personnel issue or is that a scheme issue? Because if you look at like the blocking schemes, they're not drastically different. We've run power in the past. We've run the outside zone. We've run inside zone. So the blocking scheme hasn't changed much. Maybe the line is being asked to do a little bit more individually, a little bit more in space. But has the transition caused this problem, or is it just we're underperforming, or is it a little bit of both?
I definitely think it's both, because when you mentioned that they run outside and inside zone, you're right. Like the base plays of themselves are the same. But then when you add the space that they added between the splits, that changes a lot, particularly getting out on the edge with the outside zone. And I think that might be the biggest thing. If I was just like the one biggest, most consistent issue for this line on outside zone is they can't set an edge. Like the tight ends and the tackles are just not creating that edge. You're not seeing those plays that, they take a little bit longer in the backfield to get to the edge. But once they do, there's a lot of space. You're not seeing that because I think the extra space created with the wider splits, there's easier penetration lanes. And then I think in general, this is not the quickest line. If you just look at individually, there's athleticism in general, I think, but I don't think it's the quickest first few steps line that Wisconsin's had. And then when you have that extra space and you're intentionally getting the defense spread out and making that, let's say that 5-tech or whoever it is that's outside of a tackle be wider, you're kind of giving them the advantage if you don't have that elite quickness from your offensive linemen, because they've to your outside already, and getting that reach block if you're not a quick guy is tough. So I think that's one thing that's consistent is you're not seeing the tackles and the tight ends be able to create those edges on the outside zone and make that a play that you can really rely on all the time. It's when it's worked, it's been mostly the cutbacks. They haven't really gotten, the true blue, okay, these guys got reached and they got them out to the outside situation. And then I think in general, scheme-wise, it's always a little bit of both, right? Where you scheme versus player not doing it right. But I think Longo has been a little bit quick to get away from things. As I mentioned, trying to find that counter when something works. Because I think in the past, he's not been able to rely on, let's say, inside zone working over and over. Whereas I think with this team, that's kind of how they've always been built. Like, okay, maybe we got 2 yards here. We're going to get 4 the next time. And then they kind of try to grind out first downs like that. That's a system versus mindset of the program difference. And I think that's probably going to take another offseason to get figured out. It's not going to get fixed in the next 3 games, I don't think. So no. I think there's things that can be fixed and can get tweaked. And I think when they continue to recruit on the offensive line, it's going to be in their minds, getting a little bit quicker, maybe not always worrying about having big bodies. Like they're always going to have big bodies just because of the region they recruit. But I think just not the maybe as big bodies. There's so many different elements to it that I think they can fix. I think it's just a longer term fix than I thought, because I thought it was going to be more they're elevating the passing game, keeping what they had in the run, and it did not mesh as I thought it was going to in these first 9 weeks at least.
Yeah, and like I've seen one thing too, and we're talking about the outside zone in particular. The reads for a running back at outside zone in the sidecar alignment are very different than your traditional even pistol. Mm-hmm. And, I've seen instances where setting the edge, one thing that I actually teach my tackles is you don't have to set the edge. Mm-hmm. If he's outside, you let him go outside.
Oh yeah.
And then you bang it inside. Yeah. You bang it inside. Yeah. Yep. And I haven't, I don't think that's the type of running back Braylon is.
Yeah. That's
Braylon is downhill and then bounce out or bounce back. He's not a plant your foot and get, 90 degrees vertical.
Yeah, that's probably what Ches was having. Yeah, Ches was arguably the better running back the first month of the year.
And then you look at the kids who are coming in they might be better fits for that as well. So there we're kind of showing, part of the issue, the offensive line, everything is feeding off of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And one position equal struggles at other positions, and it keeps going like that. Now you mentioned recruiting. One thing, I don't think it matters who the offensive line coach, who the head coach is. Wisconsin, we've kind of had that archetype body type that we've recruited for 20 years. Mm-hmm. 6'6" to 6'8", anywhere from 245 pounds to 270. And the idea has been
you bring up about 300, 320 now, but
yeah, you bring him in, you get him in the system, you get him up to 310, 320, and as a redshirt sophomore or a redshirt junior, boom, they're in. And with the way that we've played before, that's worked. But now you're seeing with the recruiting, like Emerson Mandel he's an interior guy. Groy is an interior guy. I'm seeing different body types, and they're already, they're maybe not college size yet, but they're in this 290 to 310 range already. So the next step in their growth within getting into college football is going to be less about bulking up and more about using what they already have. What do you see with how recruiting is going to change? How quickly do you think that's going to affect the outcome on the field?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I thought that this line was pretty deep, and I thought that they were going to – all the talk during the offseason was, if you're basically above a certain line in terms of how much we trust you, how you've performed, they're going to get you on the field. And then we saw the first 6 weeks where they had that rotation at the guard spot with Trey Wettig out there with Furtney and Huber. I thought that was going to be – include a guy maybe like Joe Brunner. Obviously Renfro's injury affected a bunch of things. That's had, I think, kind of a cascading effect as well. So I think maybe the depth that I thought was there was depth that was fit for the previous system, and maybe not as apples to apples for this new system. But in terms of just recruiting mindset, I think that one of the things is the prioritizing the quickness, because you mentioned, getting the foot in the ground from the running back spot and just attacking, right? And I think that's one thing that's been tough for this offensive line to grasp on the field. Like you see it in practice and you see them get it, I'm sure, in the classroom, but I think on the field, they don't seem to always grasp, like, it doesn't have to be lock on and block somebody 3 yards upfield like it used to be. Like that was kind of the point of pride they had reestablished in line of scrimmage. Really, it's fine. Create the seam and let the running back go. They're like, I don't think patience is a virtue like it was for the running backs in this system, like it was before. So I think that's something this line struggled a little bit with. Like, and I'm not saying that you can get blown up and as long as you're sealing your guy off, you're okay. Like that's not the case, but you don't have to drive them off the ball like in the past was really kind of the mentality. And I think maybe that's part of what they're having to further recruiting is like guys that are going to get the seal that they need with the quicker first steps and a little bit more athleticism in general, and then trusting that the running backs that they're recruiting are going to make the plays off of that.
And I've really, I've taken some time looking at the running backs, and Atuka especially. I love this kid. He is going to be the unsung gem of this class because, like you said, he is a cannonball, and he is that little spark plug that can cut around you or he can run you over. And I think he would be a great addition to that. One little thing on the recruiting, and this is something that bugs me with how this team has operated this year. How can we be a Division I program that without Jake Renfro transferring here, we didn't have a center capable of shotgun snapping? Like, I know we are a predominantly under center offense over the last several years, but we've shotgun snapped, and it's not easy, but it is. You would think we would have one. Am I missing something that we've recruited centers in the past and they've, disappeared? Or is Dylan Barrett just not good? Like, he was the backup center last year. He played in the bowl game.
Yeah, so I'm actually writing about the center position as a whole this week for Badger Extra and how they're developing it and the mindset. Because, yeah, the fact that because of one injury, you were forced to have a guy that one of your best offensive linemen, just true blockers in Tanner Bortolini, struggle with snaps as he did. Like, he deserves credit. I think the last 3 weeks, it's been way less noticeable. There hasn't been those errant ones, and that's been a lifesaver for Braden Locke, who's shorter. And I think some of those early season high snaps would have been disaster plays that Mordecai saved if it was Locke in there. So, to me, the thing with the center position is, and you know this from your experience, when guys are in high school and they're the size that you need to be a Division I prospect, you're not putting them at center unless you're at like a powerhouse type of high school program that's, just churning out D1 guys. Like, they're all tackles most of the time. Like, there's very rarely even recruiting guards at this point to play at Wisconsin. So, or high school guards, I should say. So I think the one thing is not enough of these guys, I think earlier in their careers, because they were big, ever thought I'm going to play anywhere but tackle. So I think it starts there where, like, I talked to Jack McNell for the story. He said, like, one of the first things I tell guys, if I think they have any chance of being an interior guy, learn how to snap or get snapping now. Because if you get at least the basics of the wrist, the step and snap, technique going, then I'll refine it and help you when you get here. But you can't come in at zero if you're going to play at guard. Even if you think you're a guard, like, you've got to be ready to move over. I think the thing to me was because Huber, the other transfer from Cincinnati, was already making a move from tackle to guard, and they liked what he showed at left guard during camp and during the spring. They didn't want to ask him to move again to play center, even though he might have been the better snapper when Bortolini had already done that. I think the thought was Bortolini was going to shake these poor snaps quicker. And you talk to any coaches, any of the linemen, like, Bortolini's snapping hundreds of times outside of just playing in practice. It's before and after. It just might have been like a little bit of yips or certain defensive alignments that force different steps added to the bad snaps. But it is an issue that they had one injury and then it kind of had that big effect on everything. And then the snaps were what they were the first couple of months. So I think that's something that theoretically can be fixed by what they've done this year in developing some centers and some younger guys getting ready. But I do think that overall, the development of the offensive line in the last few years hasn't been what it was, early in the Paul Chryst tenure, the Bielema era, the Alvarez era. I don't think you've seen guys make those huge jumps in the off seasons. And I think that's what Brady Collins and this current strength staff have to get back to, because even with the talent that I think they're bringing in recruiting wise on the offensive line, like, yes, they've got some size, but they need to get to Big Ten size and strength. And I think that's been a slower process in recent years than it was, 5, 10, 15 years ago.
And what we've seen is, how do you think the offensive line is taking to the transition that we've seen off the field? A lot was talked about in the lead up. These guys aren't going to be ready to use the no huddle, and Brady Collins is going to be bringing in this in. He's going to gas everybody out. I don't think that's been an issue. I think they've taken to it well, and another season in this program, I'm looking forward to maybe seeing a little bit of baby fat taken off some of these guys this offseason. Getting onto that too is another thing that people have been talking a lot about this year is, okay, if Riley Mahlman is having such a bad game, why isn't blank playing? Why haven't we seen Nolan Rucci? Why haven't we seen Joe Brunner? All these guys that we've talked about. You've seen them at practice. You've seen them at the launch. Is the gap between the first team and the second team? Because they also talked about they wanted to have this rotation and having a swing guard, a swing tackle, and a center so they could to keep them fresh. But we haven't seen that. We've seen Trey Wettig, and sometimes seems like a 3-man rotation every series. And then there's been games, I think, was it not this one, but the Ohio State game where he barely played.
This one too, the Indiana game.
Yeah. So is the gap between the first team and the second team that big, or is there something other the knowledge equals reps mentality that Phil Longo has that is keeping these younger guys from maybe pushing some of these underperforming upperclassmen?
I think the biggest thing, I'll just go individually, because I think the biggest thing that's held Rucci back is his hands, because he comes too wide. Most of the time that I've seen when he struggles, he comes too wide, and then it exposes his chest. And he's not the biggest guy. He is 6'7", 6'8", but when you just talk about weight, I mean, I think this season was the first year at Wisconsin so far that he's been above 300 pounds. And that's been a thing that both this coaching staff and the previous coaching staff knew. Like, you got to get him to add some weight to be able to handle some of these guys on the outside. So I think that's the number one technique thing that he's got to fix in this offseason. Because I really do think if we're just talking the athleticism and the quickness that you need to have, I think he might have that better than a Jack Nelson or a Malman, just pure athleticism and quick first steps. But when you see, if you're Bicknell or Longo, when you see in practice this technique mistake and exposing your chest when you're not the biggest guy, like, you're not going to win many battles, especially in Big Ten play, if you're doing that. And then Brunner, I thought he was leaving spring very much in line to at least compete for one of these guard spots. And then it did seem like in the fall there was just a little bit of hesitancy, and I don't know if it was maybe just like picking up more of the offense or just the changes that existed where they weren't maybe attacking that second level like it used to be, or the double teams up to the second level. There just seemed to be a little bit more hesitancy when I thought that was the thing that made him excel and be a backup as a freshman. Was there was just kind of a throw caution to the wind mentality and just go. And I think you go back and look at that bowl game when he was out for a series and helped lead a touchdown drive. That's how he played. He just kind of played balls to the wall and just let it go. And I think he lost that a little bit. And I wonder if there was just some confidence in the scheme issue there. So I think this offseason, I know he's been on the travel roster and out there and everything. So I think this offseason he'll be able to recover some of that. And then knowing, a guy like Michael Furtney is going to be gone, there's going to be a spot. Maybe they move Huber over. Maybe they, Renfro slots in. We'll see what Bortolini's future is. But I think there's just a better opportunity for him. And then as long as he kind of fixes whatever was going on where he wasn't playing with that same kind of abandon. But yeah, I'm surprised as anybody without the rotation, particularly at the guard spot, because I thought Wettig was playing better than the other two. And I thought I think maybe just the senior aspect of Furtney. And when I talked to Bicknell, he said that Furtney's just a guy that you're never going to fool in terms of looks or alignments and things like that. So I don't know if that the implication there is Wettig is. I don't think so, but I'm sensitive to, yes, you want to have the guys that have been playing together because continuity matters on the O-line. But I'm also kind of a hardcore, like, get your best five out there and then let them get continuity. Like, they can figure it out too. So I do find it curious in the last few weeks why this guard rotation has stopped. And I think if you look at what happened in Indiana and then, the Illinois and Ohio State games, like, there's no great justification for leaving the five out there that were out there when they're struggling like they were. And particularly at the guard spot, Johnny Newton's completely wrecking the game. Had he not gotten ejected, Illinois is winning that.
That was play of the game.
Yeah. So I think the mentality, I understand the coach's mentality, but I also disagree with it.
Yeah. So, and talking about the coaches, one thing that me and Ryan talked about on Locked On Badgers is the upperclassmen on this in this offensive line room are now on their third offensive line coach in 3 years, and three pretty different offensive line coaches in terms of mentality and fire and enthusiasm. And you've had a chance to talk with these coaches in the past. How has that transition between those three coaches affected the outcome on the field now? Because you're doing the same things, but Joe Rudolph is going to call this block something differently than Bob Bostat, than Jack Bicknell is. And with their different temperaments and coaching styles, that can be confusing maybe. But how do you think that this constant change in the offensive line room has affected the kids this year?
Yeah, it certainly hasn't helped. I think that yes, the end goal of what they're asking is very similar, but the techniques that they're asking for, I mean, Bob Bostad explained it to us last spring. Like, I'm basically asking guys to start learning French when we've been in a Spanish class. And like the idea that, and this is this kind of goes back to what we started with the disconnect of fans. Like, yes, blocking looks the same most of the time, but I'll use pass blocking as an example because I found this really interesting. So Rudolph was kind of a hybrid. He didn't care if you were going to take a vertical or a kind of a 45 set, like whatever you thought was the best for your individual rusher. He was pretty cool with, as long as the pocket was getting set how they needed it. Right. Bobo said was all vertical set, doesn't matter. Like, I don't care who you could be facing Aiden Hutchinson. You could be facing Nick Herbig. Doesn't like body type, anything doesn't matter. Straight back vertical. And they struggled with that early, and I think they finally got a little bit of rhythm with it later on in the season. And then now, because of the quicker passing game and because of what they want with this air raid system, it's really 45 and even flatter than that sometimes, the pass set. Bignell's mentality is, get hands on guys faster and then win your block with your feet, which I think could work if the different athletes out there, like Jack Nelson is doing an okay job sometimes. And then when you see him get beat, it's because he's out there too fast. And then a guy's faster than him. Because it's like, I was always taught you don't want to be head up with the guy you're blocking because he's quicker than you. And he's deciding where he's going now with a two-way go. It was always cut him off halfway, right? And it seems like that's one of the things that early on Riley Mullen was struggling with. He was getting too wide with his wide pass set, and he was getting beat inside. And I think they've figured some of these things out, but the massive different ask of year to year, I think has made it like to me, it'd be hard to have a ton of confidence in what you're doing when three guys that I think have good enough resumes that you should trust what they're saying are all telling you, oh no, this is the best way. I was like, well, how is this way not right? So it's kind of like, I don't know how these guys individually can say like, oh, I feel best with this because they are only getting 1 year of playing in a certain way. So I've talked to Nelson and Malman and Bortolini about this, and they all kind of have the mentality like, this is going to help me eventually. Having different mentalities and different techniques in the tool bag, they always say, is a good thing. But I don't think it's helped them in the short term really lock in and kind of hone a craft because the craft keeps changing on them.
And that can be difficult too, because right now they've got so much new going on in their head. And one thing that I struggle with sometimes, with new players who have experience, even new players that I've brought in from other teams, et cetera, it's almost like they're translating in their head what they're supposed to be doing. And I mean, you've been on a football field. We don't have the brain power to work our brains and our feet at the same time. And that's why sometimes it seems like, I think especially with Riley Malman and Jack Nelson at times too, is they get going the right direction, but they are just that millisecond, not even slow. It's like a hitch in their giddy up when they're trying to get out, when they're working with that wide quick set.
Yeah. And I think this is the area that I think is a sliding scale because Nelson has not been as good of a pass blocker as I think he was last season. But it's also been kind of like I think he's the best recoverer of any of their offensive linemen when he gets beat on an initial move. Like I think he's the best one at figuring out a way to get the block or at least get the guy past the pocket. I think overall this is one of those things where it's like fans see in their head the Washington State game where he got toasted, the first half against Ron Stone. And I think they kind of ignored the last few weeks where he's done a lot better. And I think Malman's kind of the same way. It's not dominant tackle play by any means, but I think it's like, this is good enough. And you're kind of nitpicking at this point because they're not letting up a ton of pressures, in my opinion. They're not letting up a ton of pressures that aren't, oh, this play has been going on for a while, or like, oh, he made a technique mistake. It's kind of like they'll occasionally get beat. They're not going to be perfect, but they're more often than not getting the job done and letting the quarterback have a chance.
Now, we're starting to get to the end of the year. We're getting into that golden time where, younger players can get, and we're not worrying about redshirting or anything like that. Going into these last few games, we want to win games. We want everything like that. What do you think that Jack Becknell's mentality is for these last 3 games? Are we going to start seeing maybe a little bit more rotation? Are we going to start seeing maybe changes in the scheme? Or do we think is like part of this season is an audition? We're going to run what we want to run. And if you can handle it, great. If you can't, well, this is what you need to work on in the off season, or maybe you need to find somewhere else. How do you think the approach of the running back room is going to be in these next 3 weeks, given that the goals of the season are drastically changed now that we're on this little streak?
Yeah, I think you're going to start. I think you're going to have to see the guard rotation come back at the very least. I think you have to get Trey Wettig back on the field, because it just doesn't make sense when you're struggling, not getting the push up the middle that you need to leave a guy that's talented enough to play without a chance. So I think that at the very least is going to be in there. I wouldn't anticipate rotation much beyond that, just because I think at this point, and I asked about the quarterbacks with this, because quarterback mobility and quarterback run game was so important early on when the offense was working, at least in spurts. And then now without that threat, just it's not in lock skill set, you're seeing they have to change the blocking scheme, because the read stuff where you leave guys unblocked, it's not effective when your quarterback is not reading that well enough to take advantage of a guy flying down, or just not fast enough to take a guy that's kind of hesitant and beat him to the edge. So I think they're going to have to get back to what we saw in short bursts, where it's a tight end splitting across and taking that guy. So it looks like a read, but it's actually just a true handoff. I think you're going to see getting back to that. And then that will help a little bit with some of the tight end blocking issues they've had. Because to me, when I watch this tight end group try to block, I think that's where my guy's supposed to be. This is what the playbook said. I'm taking a few steps. Hey, the guy just went by me and tackled the running back. Like, they just don't find work very well. So I think defining, here's where you're going, here's your guy, and it's on the backside of the play, I think that's going to help. But I don't think they're going to rotate a ton more, because I just think they're saying, this is the group we've got. This is our best chance right here. Because make no mistake, like, I don't think there's an audition process here. This coaching staff's kind of an audition process. Like, they need wins. They need to get to 7-8 wins, as many as they can here, to get some of this fan base back, and to get, I think, just a little bit of positive momentum going into the offseason. So I don't think we're going to see a ton of, pulling guys off the bench and getting them some reps here, unless maybe things go completely sideways and we get that Minnesota game with a bowl streak on the line. But I really think it's going to be the guys that we've seen, plus Wettig, and then changing the blocking scheme around to make it a little bit more defined, and then just kind of say, get back to eliminate some of the read, get these running backs just kind of going vertical, and try to make it as simple as possible, because giving them options and asking them to play instinctually, not really working.
Do you think we're going to see Renfro? We talked a little bit. We talked a little bit about it, and the speculation has been: is he hurt more than we thought he was? And then it kind of dawned on me, he could take a medical red shirt, and
here's my thought on that. So he took a medical red shirt last year for his knee, right? When the NCAA is usually pretty lenient with medical red shirts, if you've got enough documentation that, like, recovery took X amount of weeks or whatever. I wonder if they're just playing a regular red shirt card here.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It's like, this player just maybe take a red shirt year. So maybe he gets he's on the depth chart this week for the first time in a long time, as a number 2 center. I think that's a possibility. I know that the snaps have been an overriding issue, but I think Bortolini in the middle is your only guy that's consistently getting push. And I just think their mindset might be, do we want to risk that for a guy that we've never seen against Big Ten level defensive lines in game action, right? Like, however much I see him in practice is a different story. When not a great defensive line for the Badgers this year, it's particularly in the middle. So they're not seeing the best of the best. In practice, Renfro isn't. So I wonder if the mindset is like, Bortolini's a very solid blocker at center. We don't want to ask Renfroe with this kind of disjointed year that he's had to throw in there against these decent run defenses they're going to see in the next couple of weeks, particularly Nebraska and Minnesota's. So I don't know if things continue to slide and they just got to try to do something else, maybe. But I would say they're probably playing more redshirt season card. Maybe they wait to get him into a bowl game if they do make one. So I think that would probably be my play if I was Fickle and Longo.
Yeah, because just to put Renfroe back in, Tanner Bortolini deserves to play. Does he go in the guard rotation? Does he take over one of the guard spots? And one of those guys who's earned to be in the guard rotation gets out of the rotation.
Right.
So just the magic bullet of Renfroe's back, while it changes one thing, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem.
Yeah, and that's what we were all kind of waiting for in camp was like, okay, like eliminate these snap issues, get Bortolini playing guard, and see what happens. Then the foot injury happens, and it's like, oh, well, we're not going to see this for a while. So, yeah, I don't think that there's a magic fix here. I think they have to say, here's our best options and roll with it. And it's tough because the flexibility that I thought this team was going to have just hasn't been there. And the fact that the development of some of these backups just didn't happen as quickly as I thought was going to, or it seemed like it was going to happen, is a little disappointing, I think, from this coaching staff and from the support staff. But I think overall, I know I was probably guilty of thinking this was going to be too easy in terms of the fit of the personnel that was here in the scheme. So I think that maybe was, maybe the coaches were guilty of that a little bit too. I think they maybe expected it to be a little bit smoother, particularly up front, than it has been. So I think that might be a full off-season issue of kind of getting that fixed.
And that's really the thing is this stuff, as different as it is, it takes time. And calling this a transition year where all people say is an excuse, it might be an excuse, but it's completely valid.
Sure,
Things have completely changed. And as much as everything is the same, everything is slightly different.
Sure. And a team that you knew wasn't deep coming in lost your two best players on offense. You take two of the best players on most offenses away, it's probably not going to go very well.
Yeah, and I've had someone point out to me, on New Year's Day 2020, we're playing in the Rose Bowl against Oregon. Yep. And now we're here.
Should have won that game too.
What has happened to our program? And then you look at the roster. And that was a very talented roster. And how the talent has changed. As much as last year was we would want to think it's an anomaly, and then this year is a continuation on that anomaly. The talent level has changed over the last couple of years. And is how do I put this? Is Luke Fickell and this current staff kind of taking the wrath of the fan base or whatever for a problem that has been building since 2019?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to put it. Like there's been a slow leak here that's finally the tire's flat. I think, and this is true even of the 2020 season, like Jim Leonard's defense covered up a whole lot for this program for a few years now, and particularly in the recruiting sense. And then when you lose some of those studs that Leonard had and then Leonard's scheme, this is kind of the result. And I think Mike Tressel is in the most unenviable position because unless his defense was stellar with significantly dropped off talent, it was going to be real tough to get anything close to what Leonard was getting. So, yeah, I think there's definitely a factor of the fans were already frustrated, and maybe the problems that were here roster construction-wise and roster-wise weren't as obvious that until they were on the field this year. And you've got multiple positions. You've only got one or two guys who can really play. And, Luke Fickell said all offseason that he really wanted to focus on high school recruiting, and that's what he wants the base of the program to be. I think that's going to have to – that goal is going to have to be pushed another year, and I think there's going to be another really busy portal season for this team coming up here.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. They're definitely going to bring in another center. I'm just going to say that there's going to be a center in there. So I just got a couple more for you here. So, one of the again, like going back to the beginning, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is the fans' perspective of what's going on, what they're seeing in the offensive line. What can a fan? What should he be looking for in offensive line play? Because when we watch football as fans, we see the result of the offensive line play. We don't see the offensive line play. So to become a better educated football fan, what things in this offensive line, what can we see that can show us the actual progress that has been being made? Because while the offensive line play has been bad at times, they have not done anything this year that makes me think that what they're doing won't work.
Right. Yeah.
It's just it's a lack of consistency. If you put a highlight tape of this season together and at the end of the year say this is a 7-win team.
Yeah, it won't matter for sure.
You would be surprised. So as a fan, what can we do to maybe give ourselves a better perspective when it comes to offensive line play?
Sure. I think the two things that I always go back to is like, all right, is this guy playing to or putting in like these base things like, all right, feet. Are their feet stopping when they make contact? And I think that's been a massive issue on the interior in particular in the last few weeks. I think that's why they've had such an issue running the ball between the tackles. And not having Braylon Allen hurts too, but still not moving their feet when on contact because, yes, they're big and strong, but so are the guys on defense, and especially when it's linebackers blitzing. That's been a consistent issue, particularly for the guards. That's something that's an effort. That's an individual player thing. That's not scheme. That's not, whatever. Every coach that you're going to have coaching offensive line is going to tell you, never stop your feet, keep running them, that type of thing. So I think that's one thing that you can look for as the play goes on. Like if a guy gets beat, are his feet moving? Most of the time they're not going to be if he's truly getting beat and kind of pushed out of the way. So I think that's one thing. And then I think the other thing is head and hand placement. These are very basic offensive line things, but when it's right, that's when even if it's not like a dominant block, if your head and hand placement are correct, you can at least create that seal that I was talking about earlier, that you don't have to push a guy back 3 yards off the ball and dominate them. You can just get a block done. That's something that's been hit and miss. When this team is good, that stuff's correct. When it's not, you can see that's how the blocks are getting shed. That's how the penetration's happening. That these guys just aren't getting their head and hands to either the front side shoulder or wherever they need to be for a particular play. So I think when you're looking at offensive line play as a whole, feet continually moving, head and hand placement in the right spot. Even if it's off the backside shoulder when you're running outside zone, you're just going to push a guy by, like making sure that stuff's correct. That's how you avoid some dumb holding penalties where you're not in the right position, you reach and grab, or you can continually get a guy moving when you're not in the best position because at least your technique is correct. So I think those are two things that you can watch and say, when this line's good, those things are intact and kind of rolling how they should be. And when it's not, they're a pretty consistent issue.
All right. So one last thing I got for you is, a lot of people are ready to jump off the ledge. Like, that's it. This isn't my team anymore. We might as well join the MAC and everything like that.
Where's the fullback?
Yeah, where's the fullback? He's playing tight end. But tell me we have reasons to be optimistic. It seems like the players have bought in to what Lou Fickell is selling. Maybe the fans don't, because he does some of those what we might think is corny things that coaches do, but kids love. Kids eat up. And it really does seem like they're buying in. And we have reasons to be optimistic.
Yeah, I think, all right, so let me just ask this. Was anybody optimistic going out of the 2021 season about the general state of this offense, besides Braylon Allen? Like, exclude Braylon Allen's potential. Was anybody happy about the state of the offense? So I think what's happened here is you're going from one side of the spectrum where it's like it's early 2000s pro style offense, and it's what's being phased out of college football and football in general. I mean, it's not like there's a ton of NFL teams running that style anymore either. It's really just the Titans because they have Derrick Henry. But you go from that end of the spectrum, and then you're going not all the way to the other end. This isn't Mike Leach air raid where there's no running back really, but it's a step and a half behind it. So I think right now, if you're looking at that as a spectrum and where you're at, like they're maybe halfway there, right? And that's a talent thing. That's a talent understanding scheme. And I think maybe if Fickle and Longo would have had a time machine and had a do-over, they might par down how much they were trying to do of Fickle's style and maybe just mix in that with what was already here to match it a little bit better. I think they maybe pushed this roster beyond what it could do in terms of scheme. So I think there's optimism or reason for optimism that as they get more players here and guys get longer into the scheme and understand more, particularly the wide receivers, because I think this could look a whole lot different, a whole lot better if they were catching the ball and like truly separating how they should be in the air raid. Like that's a guys that's never doing this system before issue, particularly guys that are already here. So I think there's reason for optimism because, as you mentioned before, there have been enough highlights, there have been enough drives that things click. It's just the consistency comes from having it done a bunch and not being your 6th, 7th game doing it from only training it one off season.
Right. And then, you know what? The big thing with the air raid is you're trying to create horizontal and vertical stresses at all time in the passing game. When your receivers basically let the defense play man coverage the entire game, and it doesn't matter what offense you're running. If you can stay in man coverage and not get beat as a defense, you're going to have a good day. And that's what we're seeing. As much as we were all excited about these transfers, CJ is young. Burrows is younger.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, it's not like we brought in the equivalent of Caleb Williams into the receiver room. We brought in, young guys with potential. So that's the one thing there. I'm just having a momentary brain fart there. Okay, so last thing that I want to get in on this with the offensive line. How do you think the kids have taken to Jack Bicknell? Because that's another thing that I've seen come up in mentions is like, oh, Jack Bicknell's terrible. This guy's been coaching for 30 years. He seems like the most
nearly 40. Yeah.
Yeah, he seems like one of these most old school offensive line coaches that you can get. And I didn't think we could get more old school than off of Bostad. But Jack Bicknell he reminds me of my offensive line coach in high school, which is why I would probably love him because he seems like a no-nonsense kind of guy telling how you can do it. How are these kids transitioning to him? I probably should have brought this up earlier when we were talking about the offensive line coach, but while it's fresh in my mind, and you've spoken to him.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think he's very much a hands-on teacher, the way that Rudolph was. That when you watch like individual offensive line time during practice, that was the thing that always kind of stood out to me watching Rudolph's practices versus Bostad's. Was Rudolph was always right with the line, and even if they were going at a slow pace during some of those drills, it was because it was all about like, okay, we're going to walk through this and get you head and hands the right way. Like, and he's right there next to him, like kind of going through it with him. I think Bostad was a little bit more, this is the way we do it, get going. And then when mistakes happened, it was volume. The corrections were loud and intense, and maybe wasn't quite as teaching. Well, it was teaching, but it's just a different way. And I think the thing is, Bostad's way, I think you just need so much more time, and I don't think you have that anymore in college football. In the way that the way that practices are, contact days, all that stuff. I just don't think that method is going to work long term anymore, just because the way that practices have changed. I think Bicknell's closer version to Rudolph, and I know that guys like him in general. Like he's a pretty affable guy, and having been an offensive lineman too, that certainly helps him kind of just the credibility there. So I think they like him pretty well. I think that there was a little bit of hesitancy early, that questioning if they could do what they needed to do in this system. And then when you struggle offensively at times, I'm sure a lot of these guys think like, oh, hey, can we just run power? Can we just tighten up a little bit and attack some guys? But I think that overall there's been buy-in and kind of a mutual respect between Bicknell and these guys. And I think the number one thing that's helped all of these coaches that Fickle did is like, there weren't a ton of guys run off. There was a few, there were a few guys that kind of got the message on the wall, like this isn't going to work out for me. But I think that the fact that they didn't come in Deion Sanders this and tell everybody they stink and get out of here, like I think that had carried a lot of cachet in the locker room, and particularly this offensive line room. The only guy that potentially was going to leave was Furtney, and then he came back out of the portal. And then they only added, they lost obviously Tippmann to the NFL. They only added the one freshman, James Duran. So it's all these guys that are still here. They've got pretty good continuity, and I think they accepted pretty quickly that Bicknell was somebody they could trust in that.
So I think, the kind of the overarching theme of everything we've talked about today, we're going to be okay.
I think so.
Rome wasn't built in a day, and we're going to get there. It's just patience is not something Wisconsin fans have.
The patience has been eroded since that Rose Bowl we were talking about.
But going into this new era of college football with all the Western teams coming into the Big Ten, we're in that position, I think, that we've got the right people in place for the long term. Short term is going to be a struggle, but another offseason, maybe getting some guys in the transfer portal. And I think with a very good recruiting class coming in, I think we're in a good position going forward.
Yeah, and I think that the expansion of the Big Ten has only added to fan angst, because they see it. Like, the schedule is never going to be as easy as it was on paper, at least this season. So I think that's added to the anger you see when things aren't working out as quickly as people had hoped.
I think people realize is our schedule is getting difficult, but so is everybody else's. And hopefully things even out there. I was hoping to keep you for about a half hour. Worry up on 52 minutes. We can keep going. Hey, nothing bad about talking ball. But I think won't take away any more of your time today. Everyone is, you should have done this before you're watching anything I do, but go find Colten's work on Wisconsin State Journal, Badger Extra. A lot of great stuff, and he gives great perspective on what we as Badger fans should see. So definitely do that. And we'd love to get you on again, maybe in the off season, kind of review what we've seen, and take it from there.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ryan.
Perfect.